Hi everyone, my name is Mojgan and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and the executive director here at Cross Cultural Expressions. And I want to welcome everyone today to our YouTube video and thank you all for tuning in. And I wanted to tell you that this is the first of a series of YouTube videos created by Cross Cultural Expressions in partnership with the Access for All Deaf, Hard of Hearing, Blind, and Physical Disabilities Underserved Cultural Communities of the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health. So we are doing this in partnership with LA County Department of Mental Health. And during this series of YouTube videos, we'll be exploring a variety of topics that are related to the intersection of deaf, hard of hearing, blind, partially sighted, visually impaired, and physically disabled individuals, their lives as it relates to mental health, well-being, and the accessing of mental health services. So this is an opportunity for members of these communities to sit together and discuss concerns, share resources, and give insight as to the work that can be done to keep individuals and communities uplifted and living their best lives. So before I introduce our wonderful panelists or guests that we have here today, I wanted to make sure to share with everyone the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health's Access Helpline number. This is a 24-hour helpline for mental health resources and support that anybody could call. And that phone number is 1-800-854-7771. So 1-800-854-7771. So I wanted to welcome you guys here and give you the opportunity to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about what you do, who you are, and in particular, your connection with the blind and visually impaired communities, and we can start from there. So would you like to go first?
Well, thank you for having me here. I'm very happy to be a part of this panel. My name is Jessie Wolinsky. I have a condition called retinitis pigmentosa that is causing me to go blind slowly over time. So I have no peripheral vision, no nighttime vision, and like I said, the vision that I do have is slowly decreasing until one day it will not be there anymore. I was diagnosed with this condition when I was 7 years old. I'm now 30. I just became legally blind about 3 years ago. But I have been involved with the blindness community for over 16 years now. I work with an organization called the Foundation Fighting Blindness, and I mainly help them with a big fundraising event that they have called the Vision Walk. And recently I've spent the past 2 years serving as the president for the Los Angeles chapter, and we try to connect people with resources and a sense of community because going blind can be a very isolating sort of experience. So I'm very, very proud to do that sort of work. And I'm happy to be here today because I think the biggest thing that I'm passionate about in terms of the blindness community is providing mental health services or giving people an outlet to, like I said, make connection and maybe feel a little bit more comfortable in their skin as they experience vision loss.
My name is Mojgan Rahbar, and I am a journalist, writer, translator, and I was diagnosed with choroidal melanoma in 2006, and as a result, I had to remove my right eye, and I now have a glass eye, and it has been a very interesting roller coaster, the experience, and I'm glad that I get a chance to talk about it.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here. You mentioned, Jessie, that this started for you at the age of 7. And so I'm wondering, what was that like? Like, what was the experience of being so young and all of a sudden being faced with something that, you know, is definitely challenging and such a challenge in life? And how did that kind of unfold itself?
Yes, well, I think being diagnosed so young, I didn't really understand the gravity of the situation. I think, you know, I was just kind of being dragged to all these eye doctor's appointments. And so I didn't really have too much of a reaction at that point. I think it was more something that my parents had dealt with, the diagnosis. But I do very vividly remember them sitting me down when I was about 14 or so, and them really explaining the gravity of the situation. Because at the time when I was 7, I still had, I mean, normal vision, and, you know, in terms of what that meant to me, but I didn't really notice a whole lot of the effects. So when they did tell me at 14, it was incredibly difficult. I mean, I think being a teenager, you know, you have enough problems. So I went through a long, long period after that of depression, and that's something that I still struggle with, but it completely rocked my world. I genuinely felt that it was the end of life as I knew it. And I, you know, I kind of gave up on all my dreams, and unfortunately got into drugs and alcohol and anything I could to self-medicate and really escape the reality of the situation. And it was not easy. I was not in a place where I felt comfortable to talk about my condition. I genuinely wanted to hide it from everyone. And it's been a long, long journey to kind of accept it and feel empowered by it ultimately, but it's been a process. So yeah.
And what was that journey like for you, going from those beginning years? Maybe you could talk a little bit about when you first got the diagnosis.
Yes, I think the hardest part in the beginning for me was the fact that I was diagnosed with cancer. And, you know, I remember vividly the day I went to the doctor's office, the ophthalmologist, with just a complaint. My complaint was that my eye is a little bit blurry, because oddly enough, we went to a theme park with my children, and I went on a roller coaster, and coming you know, back from the roller coaster, I felt, you know, the right eye is a little bit blurry. And the ophthalmologist was, you know, very shocked. And I had never been actually to an ophthalmologist before, and it was just right before my 41st birthday, so I never had any kind of an eye issue. And by the time I got to the second specialist on the same day, and he told me that this is a melanoma, it's a tumor inside the eye. And, you know, as they are directed, I guess, to say, what he said was that, you know, if it has metastasized, which is very possible because it's a very big tumor, it is probably gone into the bloodstream and directly to the liver, and there is nothing else we can do after that. So that was my main issue, you know, right there. Back then I had, oh my God, it's still emotional. I had a 3-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 16-year-old. So I think the main issue for me back then was just surviving the cancer and being able to be with my children. The fact of becoming...
I know it's emotional. It's obviously emotional, because I think that's one of the things about traumatic experiences that a lot of times is baffling to ourselves, let alone other people, is that literally years and years can pass, and reliving it and talking about it again just brings back all of those emotions as if you're experiencing it right now. So I think that's, I mean, talk about the intersection of, you know, the blindness or the visually impairment and the mental health is that moment. Whenever you go back to it, you start to relive it again. And obviously, I suppose unless it's something that you're born with, it's definitely a shock whenever you get that news, whether it's 7 or older. And actually, I think, as you mentioned, that being perhaps younger, you kind of are even more resilient maybe, and you kind of take things as it's given to you without thinking about it too much, or being aware of the consequences of it too much. So definitely having experienced that at the age of 40 when you have your own children is a whole other level that sets in. So I'm going to let you continue.
It is, yeah, no, it's definitely difficult. It's interesting that I have told this story numerous times because, as you know, every time you tell the story, it really helps you. It's kind of therapy, which is good, which is really wonderful to have these kind of gatherings to be able to discuss it freely. And maybe it's been 5-6 years since I told the story, so
so you were
all
due.
new again.
Yes.
Yeah, I was due. I thought I was done with it, but anyway, as far as becoming visually impaired because of this situation, it was at that moment very secondary. And I was more than happy to remove the eye in order to stop any kind of other health issues. So it took a while to really understand the challenges of not having an eye. So, and it's still challenging, but I think one of the reasons it became easier for me to accept than other people that I talked to, because throughout the years, maybe because the acceptance was so easy, actually the ophthalmologist who did the surgery for me introduced me to a couple of people who had the same surgery, asking me to talk to them because they couldn't accept the loss of the eye. So it was interesting, you know, going through it with other people and seeing how the challenges that they face. But I think, you know, and other than accepting, what else can you do? What's the alternative, you know?
Very true.
I think for anyone, you know, experiencing a certain trauma, there's often a journey between that first kind of step in the loss, which is that denial or the anger, to then coming to the acceptance. And so you mentioned, Jessie, about, you know, being 14 and it becoming more real and clear to you about perhaps what was going on. So what was that journey like for you? Like, what were the challenges and how did you come to the place that you are now where, you know, you mentioned that it's, you know, even a gift what you've been given. And so can you walk us a little bit through that process for yourself?
So it's been a long process to be able to get to the place where I'm at now. And I think the most impactful thing that kind of changed my view about my disability was getting involved with the Foundation Fighting Blindness and meeting other blind and visually impaired people and seeing that there's hope out there. But, you know, I definitely dealt with the suicidal feelings for a long time. And even still now, I can kind of slip into that notion of really feeling like it's too scary to handle. And so I'd rather not be here rather than live life as a blind person. And I think one thing that really helped me want to be brave enough to continue my life despite having this blindness is I unfortunately lost a cousin to suicide, and it showed me really the reality of how taking your life can affect others. And I thought, you know, I need to find some way to view my life and myself and my disability in a healthier way. But it's definitely a process. So I think getting involved and finding community and just being able to accept myself as I am. I think whether you're disabled or not, you have to learn how to accept who you are and what you have going on in your life, and recognize that it's not always easy, but it's possible to kind of embrace what makes you different and maybe even turn it into a strength.
And thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. And how about you, Mojgan? Have you been able to take what you've been given and turn it into strength, or where are you on that process?
I love the way that she described it. Really, it is a process. It is a process. It's a daily intention and decision that you make every day. Every day you wake up and you say, "Yes, this is it. I'm gonna go on." And just flip the switch because the depression sets in, the anxiety sets in. There are things you could do that you can't do anymore, which becomes aggravating. uh, so, as I said before, um, the one thing that helped me really was, of course, therapy. Getting into a lot of spirituality, that was very helpful. A way to see things differently, to a point that when I ponder or think about it right now, I believe that the loss of the eye, I lost one eye, but my eye opened in so many other ways. It was like a third eye opened. I saw so many things around me, physically and emotionally, that I didn't know before, I didn't see before, I wasn't aware of. So it has been, uh, as Jesse said, it has been a gift, and it becomes, if you think about it, if you process it correctly, it can definitely become a superpower instead of a loss. Each of these wounds, if you process it correctly, can become a power, and it's just up to your perception. And when the times that it gets harder than other times, then God bless medication. At the beginning, took it more often, now less often. But there are times that you're just not bouncing back. The spirituality doesn't help, the positivity doesn't help, and you're just like, today is one of those days that I really need to take some medication for this one. So,
How do you think that having experienced the vision loss or the blindness, like, what did it do for you in terms of slowing down your life or paying more attention to one thing rather than another, or taking it more easy, or even did it help in having, like, gain a sense of self-compassion? I'll start with you, Mojgan, because especially, as a person who is older who had this experience, did that shift in any way for you? I suppose what I'm asking is, like, the relationship with yourself. How did that shift?
definitely, I think that was one of the eye-opening events. That was one of the things that happened. I saw myself very differently. I saw people around me, the dynamics of even very close family members and friends changed. People that I always perceived that as friends, all of a sudden it was like, no, I don't think this was a real friendship. It was just my need of having somebody around. And paying more attention to what I needed, paying more attention to not trying to make other people happy all the time, but also myself, because now I needed some more care. Um, it was interesting to find out how hard it is for me, or it was, still is, to accept help from others. And this is definitely a kind of disability that you need help from others. And it it was interesting to find out that I had that much resistance to asking for help. A lot of stubbornness got less, I think, because that's what you need to do. And a lot of dependencies. I would say, you say cut the cord with so many people around me that I noticed I'm just dependent on them for no reason, and they are dependent on me for no reason, and it's not helping either of us. I think I learned about boundaries after this, much more than I had ever known. I mean, I actually, in therapy, you know, because I had gone to therapy before, they talked about boundaries. I didn't really understand. I always thought, well, yeah, I have boundaries, but it made sense then, you know. It's like, so as any other experience, it can be uh, a way for you to grow if you think about it in a positive way, and if you go through the process with patience. And of course, if you don't want to, it can also become something very sad and aggravating and ruin your life. You know.
Yeah. What do you think, Jessie?
I would definitely agree with that. I think that you bring up a great point about resisting the change, you know, because as we lose vision and as we have to adjust to these, you know, this new way of living, we have to accept the change. And I think that's just a hard thing for people to do in general. It's not easy to become comfortable in new situations. So I think that a big part of me accepting myself was leaning into that change, and like you bring up, having to let go of things and having to, you know, slow things down a little bit. And as I lose more and more vision, I'm so aware more than ever about the present moment and how this is all that we really have. So that's a big thing that I try to stay in the present moment as much as possible, because I don't know what I'm going to see or not see tomorrow. So not only do I have to accept myself and accept my blindness, but I have to just stay as present as possible and appreciate all that I can see right now while I still can. But I mean, that's a process as well. It's not easy to to accept ourselves just as we are. So it can be very, very challenging. But I think that overall, for me, it's been helpful to know that my blindness doesn't have to define me in a way that I thought that it did before. I thought, oh, I'll just be this blind girl who's sitting alone in a room, not being able to do anything or live a life. And I had to realize that that was just not true at all. And sometimes I have to remind myself, because like Mojgan said, there's good days and bad days, and some days where I feel confident and, you know, accepting of who I am. But other days it seems daunting and seems scary, and I have to learn how to be a little bit kinder to myself on those days and say, hey, maybe you're not feeling it right now, but hang in there, because you'll feel that confidence again. And just kind of going through the ebbs and flows of, you know, all the emotions that living this way can bring up.
I think one thing that, as Jessie said, how you perceive, you know, when they tell you, we are going to take out this eye, you won't have vision in your right eye, and there's going to be a glass eye that you have to wear. You don't think about the consequences so much of what it actually is, but what society has told you it is. You know, it's like, oh, that's exactly it. So I have to sit in the room and everybody has to do everything for me. So I can't drive anymore. So I can't do this anymore. I can't do that anymore. And once you process the fact that this is society's way of telling you what it should be, but it really isn't. A lot of doors open then, you know. So that's where, again, I say, another eye opened. You know, my eye opened into so many things, and then everything else in society, all these other things that society dictates, you question. And I think that's part of the growth too. You question everything. That is it really the way it should be, or is it just the way that the general public likes to put something in a box because it's easier for them to digest, you know? So I think that was one of the biggest eye-opening events for me.
That's such a good thing that you bring up about how other people are telling you what it is. I feel like I went through that a lot, where I had jobs where people say, oh, don't have Jessie do this because she's blind. And I thought, oh, I can't do that. And then I never even tried to do it. And I realized, oh, no, I can do that, or maybe I just have to do it in a different way, but I wouldn't even try because people around me would tell me that's not something that I was capable of. So I think it's kind of having to be brave enough to figure out what you can and can't do, and yes, be realistic about what limitations may come up, but not believing what other people place at your feet. You know, there's like a narrative of like, oh, well, you're blind and can't do this or that. And a big part of accepting myself is realizing that that's not true. Just because someone says this is what blind people are, this is what disabled people are, that's not necessarily the case. And you kind of have to write that out for yourself.
So it sounds like it's a real focus on abilities versus disability.
Definitely, yeah.
And I think that might be something like one of the big takeaways from what the two of you are discussing for any viewers who might be watching, that at some point maybe that shift has to happen internally to really start to focus on, well, forget about all the stuff I can't do. What is it that I can do? And it sounds like you've surprised yourselves with how much you are actually much more capable than perhaps the world has told you, or the preconceived notions of what there are. Which kind of brings us to the area of stigma. So obviously there's a lot of stigma within society and the world, not only on whatever the disability is, being, you know, blind or virtually sighted in this case. Also, you both mentioned, you know, the struggles with mental health that have resulted. And so to what degree did you feel stigma around, you know, having those mental health concerns come up? And where did secrecy play a part in either of these situations?
Well, I'll definitely say, I mean, I've mentioned that I was very secretive about my disability in general, but then when I was experiencing depression because of it, that was also another thing that I had to remain, or I felt I had to remain secretive about, especially if I'm taking medication. There's this all stigma about that. And, oh, she's just, you know, this crazy sad girl or whatever. And so I think that that was something that I had to get over and kind of embrace. Like, okay, yeah, I might live with depression or live with anxiety or live with these challenges, but that doesn't mean that that's only what my life is about. And I think being open and honest with the mental health aspect about going blind has really helped me accept my blindness more and accept myself more. I remember when I first started being more open about specifically my suicidal thoughts and feelings, and I got a lot of pushback from people saying, is this too much to share? It's too personal, it's too sensitive. People are going to look at you in a certain way. And I figured, you know, people are going to look at you in whatever way they want to look at you, but I care about how I view myself, and I just refuse to have any sort of shame attached to my story. So I think it was like, I can't live my authentic life if I'm not being honest with myself about what I'm going through, and I'm the only one who can let those things define me. So yeah, I can have blindness, I can have depression, I can have these dark thoughts, but that's not where I have to stay. That's not who I have to be. And a lot of it, unfortunately, has a very negative stigma attached to it. And I was worried about that. I'm like, gosh, what if I, you know, come out about how I struggle with depression and people always think that I'm like that. And then when I want to talk about the happy aspects of my life, are they going to say, oh, well, she's lying about that? She's obviously doesn't have any happy aspects because she just told us that she's suicidal and depressed. And it's like, it's all of it. You know, we are given a spectrum of emotions and experiences, and being open and honest about the negative stuff doesn't mean I don't have the positive stuff. And a lot of that is really defining it for yourself and not listening to those stigmas. And that's why it's so important to speak about it and to do things like this.
You know, I think coming from a culture, a Middle Eastern culture, where secrecy is always encouraged, it was very hard to deal with two aspects. losing an eye and having cancer, because you don't talk about having cancer. It was interesting that a couple of months after this whole ordeal, a friend of mine calls me and says, I really need to talk to you. And I'm like, what is it that she needs to talk to me? I haven't talked to her for 6, 7 months now. And she wanted to tell me that, 10 years before this, she had breast cancer and she didn't even tell her mom. So it was only between her and her husband. And she went through the whole chemo, she went through everything, and nobody knows. And she just felt comfortable enough to tell me because she heard I also had cancer. And I'm like, that is the degree of secrecy in this society, that you don't even want to mention that you had cancer. Now you got to mention that I had cancer and I lost an eye and I have a glass eye. So I've told the story before that after my second surgery, my grandmother, God bless her, she called and said, okay, you don't need to tell anybody you're going to get a glass eye. Nobody needs to know that you only have one eye. You don't need to tell anyone. Just go as if nothing happened. I'm like, but I've been absent from society for 3 months with all these different, surgeries. How am I going to explain that? And she goes, doesn't matter. Just tell them you weren't feeling well. You don't need to tell anybody you got cancer. You don't need to tell anybody you got. And it was very interesting as she was saying this, and she was so genuine and she was so loving, and she was so fearful about what people are going to think about me, how people are going to judge me, and I guess how people are going to judge her, because now she has a damaged granddaughter, maybe. So it was interesting that at that moment, my resolution or my decision was, I really got to tell everyone that I have one eye. I mean, I have to, it was like, I'm still like that. I go somewhere and I'm like, all of you, I want to know, I have one eye. So if you're on my right side and you wave to me and I don't see you, it's not because I'm ignoring you, it's because I can't see you. So it is interesting how I felt I had to do the opposite. And I think it helped me. It really helped me gain the strength. It really helped me, as Mastana says, see the abilities which I didn't think I have, instead of concentrating on the disability that I have.
It's very interesting. I would always kind of feel like silence is its own sickness in a way. And of course, there's different like cultural aspects to how people feel about talking about these sort of things. But I felt like for me, it was always so much worse when I was staying silent about what I was going through and trying to pretend like everything was okay, because it wasn't. So the more that I tried to put on that facade, the more I felt like I didn't know who I was and I didn't know how to be happy. And being able to be open and honest about what I'm going through has brought about so much confidence that I never expected. They say like, oh, vulnerability is weakness, and it has been the biggest strength for me. So it's so important that, you've also had that experience of being open and honest and saying like, this is what I'm going through. This is who I am. I don't need to hide any parts of myself from myself or from anyone else.
And it's like when I spoke to my friend who had cancer and hadn't told anybody, my question was, why didn't you tell anybody? And she was like, I didn't want to be labeled as the person with breast cancer. And I said, so are you feeling okay now? And she goes, every day I get up fearful and full of anxiety. And I can't do anything about that. And I just want to know how you are dealing with that. And my first response was, I'm not that fearful and full of anxiety about that particular thing. I have other fears and anxiety because I'm open about it. As soon as you put it out there, you disarm the fear and the anxiety that comes from hiding something. Not only have I had all these problems happen, but now I'm hiding it too. That's a whole other, fear and anxiety that comes.
I feel like you think people can use it against you. Like, oh gosh, what if you get so anxious? Like, what if they find out and they think this of me or that of me? But it's like if you're putting it out there and you're confident in your own story, it's like what's anyone gonna say? You know, there's nothing for me to be fearful of.
I mean, I think there's a lot to taking charge of our own narrative, and I think that's what you guys are really talking about here, is the power that exists when you really take charge of your own narrative, rather than kind of separating yourself and isolating yourself and keeping yourself in this box of fear, in the hopes that if I'm in this box, nobody will find out and nobody will place a narrative onto my experience. And so I really commend both of you for really taking charge of your own narrative. You talked about the anxieties, and you talked about the depression, and you talked about the days which are more and more, which are positive and happy and hopeful and empowered. I haven't heard much about anger. I'm sure as people go through different traumatic experiences that there must be a certain amount of anger. So was that part of the journey for you? And if so, what was your family, friends, or society's reaction to that?
Ooh, man. Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up because, yeah, anger, I think, was one of the biggest emotions that I felt and still do feel. And I remember I would break things and rip things, and I had a full-length mirror closet that I absolutely tore to shreds, punching it and kicking it. Like I would just had all of this anger rumbling inside of me all the time, and it could be triggered by the smallest thing, and sometimes that still comes up. You know, if I'm walking with my cane and I trip over something, and you feel that anger bubble up, and I think it's very scary for the people around you, obviously, to see you be in that place. And, you know, sometimes I guess you could take it out on people or something like that. But I think that is one of the trickiest emotions for me to kind of deal with because it's hard to not be angry about something, but I think at the end of the day, you can't control what's happening. So it's like I can't control what I'm experiencing. I can't control that I'm going blind. I can't maybe control the natural feelings that come up as a result of it, but I can control my reaction. And I don't want to feel so angry and so upset. So I think a lot of that is kind of being self-reflective as much as you can and recognizing, okay, I'm feeling angry right now, but I don't need to respond in anger like I used to. Maybe take a couple breaths, maybe go for a walk, maybe, you know, take medication. Like whatever it is for you, you need to find ways to kind of deal with those types of emotions that are just going to arise naturally.
And sometimes maybe you just need to kick a mirror or whatever you.
Sometimes you might, yeah. You know, now I'll just punch a pillow or something, maybe a little less messy. But yeah, you gotta accept that. I talk a lot about the spectrum of emotions. Like we all have them. We're all meant to feel them. So it's not like, oh, the anger's coming up, I have to completely ignore it and push it away and never, ever, ever feel angry, because that's not realistic. It's like, yes, I can feel angry. I can sit with that, but maybe know that I don't have to stay angry. And I think that's a big part of it. I don't want to not recognize that I have these emotions or act like it's wrong to feel angry. It's very understandable, but I don't want to live in angry mode all the time.
Absolutely. You know, that's very interesting. I never thought about that. And I think I know why, because maybe because of the culture, maybe because of the family upbringing, maybe because I'm always just a low energy kind of a person. Anger just takes too much energy. The energy runner that I go to, sometimes she screams for me because she's like, there's just so much anger that you're not even noticing throughout your body, you know, blocking all these chakras. So scream, and I just can't scream. And you know, that's one of the things my husband always makes fun of me. He says, you can't even yell. You know, I can't. I mean, I try calling my kids from the end of the house and said, they won't hear you. You don't know how to yell. So it's like she yells for me. And I guess that's something I got to work through. A healthy dose of anger is good. So,
That's
yeah.
so interesting to hear, though. You know, we happen to have a panel of females, and I wonder how much of that is the fact that, again, going back to like, you know, kind of societal unspoken rules that don't really want to give permission to women in particular and young girls in particular to experience anger. So maybe we turn that anger into more of a inward despair rather than really allowing ourselves to feel that anger and discharge that anger. Because I think anger does make people around us, or could potentially make people around us feel uncomfortable. And so how much of your experience in the past and today revolves around not making the people around you feel uncomfortable, and to what degree have you let that go? Like, have you come to terms with being okay with that, or you know, making it okay for people to relate to you even though they might be experiencing something that is challenging or uncomfortable for them?
I definitely experienced that a lot. I think that it can just be uncomfortable for people to simply hear about my disability and about blindness. I think it can bring up a lot of emotions for them, even strangers. So sometimes people say, "Oh, that's very, very personal and very, you know," and I can maybe be a little bit too much with how vulnerable I choose to be with people. But the people in my life, my friends and family, have always been very supportive. And I know that there are certain times when I do get very depressed or very angry. It can be scary for them to see me be in that state because there's nothing for them to do. Unfortunately, there's no really, you know, help that they can provide besides simply being there for me. And I think a lot of times I've struggled with trying to hide things more from those people just because I don't want them to feel scared or feel uncomfortable or anything like that. And it's taken a long time for me to lean into the support that they really want to provide. But it can be hard. It can be scary. So I think a lot of that is knowing when to lean on people and knowing who to lean on. You know, you talk about finding out the people who are really there for you and want to help, and knowing that, like, okay, if these people are in my life and they love me, they're going to want to hear about these sort of things. And I think there's a big difference between taking out your emotions on others and simply communicating your emotions to others. You know, if I'm feeling angry, I can say, hey, I'm feeling really angry. This is upsetting. I'm going through this, rather than snapping at someone or, you know, being really reactive when it has nothing to do with them. So I think I had to learn what that difference was and how I can effectively communicate what I'm feeling.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think with people close to me, I really try not to make them uncomfortable. I really want them, like, I understand that you know, my children know that if we are in a crowded space, and especially if it's nighttime, I really need somebody to hold my right hand. Otherwise, I'm bumping into everybody all the time. So, you know, I feel really bad because, like, my daughter, you know, she feels responsible. And I'm thinking, well, no, it's a good growing experience for her, you know. Although she feels like she has to take care of me, sometimes it's good for her to do that. So, but I'm always very cautious about not making people who are close to me uncomfortable. But boy, do I get a kick out of people who are not close to me, making them feel
Yeah.
uncomfortable. It's like, I just go at it and I tell them, and they become very, you know, these are things they don't want to talk about because, you know, they don't even want to think about it, let alone me going into details. And it's a bit of a game. Like, yeah, how uncomfortable are you gonna get? You know, so that's my little game that I play with some people.
And I've noticed that when I first started being open about my blindness, like it's an uncomfortable feeling to be living in a world that's not designed for you. So when I go places, especially dark places, I'm always feeling like a physical stress and just uncomfortable in my body, having to like navigate new things and or relying on people. And so it's been a big process because that feeling transfers. So then other people around me are feeling uncomfortable and how do I help and what do I say and what do I do? So I think it's kind of, knowing when that feeling comes up, how to really respond and maybe even laugh at it or, whatever, because, it can take over and make you not want to go and do things or make people potentially not even want to be around you. And it depends.
So as we're starting to wrap up, I want to know, for people who might be watching or listening to this program, who are maybe at the beginning of this journey, who have just had the diagnosis or who are going through some of the earlier experiences that you guys went through. In particular, you spoke about that sense of isolation, the fear, the maybe denial, the anger, all of these emotions that kind of come with the notion that either I have lost vision or I'm going to gradually lose vision. What would your advice be? And do you have any resources that you can also share with our audience?
Definitely. Well, I think the biggest thing that I want to reiterate is what a process it is to get to acceptance. Like you said, there's anger, there's denial, there's all these emotions until you get to the acceptance. So don't shy away from those and, understand that it's going to be a journey and feel how you need to feel as intensely as you need to feel those things, but you don't need to stay there. And I just want people to know, especially when you're newly diagnosed, it can really feel like your whole life has just been flipped upside down, and it can be very, very scary. I just want people to know that they're not alone, and to be able to find community and find other people who will understand is really, really helpful. And to know that, yeah, maybe your life is going to look different now, but different isn't bad. And I think there's so much beauty in leaning into what makes us different, and there's beauty in our uniqueness. So yeah, you might be in a whole different, stage of life, and you're going to have to do things in new ways. But you're strong enough to handle that. And it doesn't have to be a negative thing despite negative feelings or challenges that may arise because of it. There's a lot of beauty in it as well. So I would just say, don't give up, hang in there, and, you can still create a great life no matter what you're going through. I would say the number one resource is the Foundation Fighting Blindness, and I have been able to meet a lot of other visually impaired people through that organization, and also their whole thing is raising money to find cures for retinal degenerative diseases, so that aspect provides a lot of hope for people who are experiencing blindness. So I would say if anyone, can get involved in that organization, it's definitely a national organization, so I would say to look into things like that. And do your research. There's so many other organizations out there who are, creating change and providing hope for people who are experiencing vision loss. And I also have a podcast, and it is called the Badass Blind Babe Podcast. Nice. And yeah, right. And I talk all about, self-love and loving myself and how I, have been able to create a positive relationship with my blindness. So definitely encourage people to check that out. But at the end of the day, I just want people to know that they're not alone, and you got to find your community.
I do agree with Jessie. The finding people that have been through this before or are going through it is very important. One of the things that really helped me was just a Facebook group with single-sighted individuals, which was very interesting because then something that you're going through, you see that they're going through too. So you just become less weird to yourself, and just group therapy. And a lot of times the physicians have resources that they can share with you if you ask them. I know my ophthalmologist gave me a couple of books about single site, which was very helpful at the moment. So, and being open about it. When you're open about it, you find other people. It's interesting, the first 3 months when I had an eye patch, until my glass eye was ready, everywhere I went, I would have people approach me and say, "Oh my God, my sister is like this. Oh, my friend just is." So it's like we are surrounded with people that have the same issues. It's just that nobody likes to announce it, so everybody is hiding it from each other. But if you just don't hide it, then it makes it easier for other people not to hide it. And then it becomes easier for whole society to digest it and for you to digest it. So I think it's very important to just be open about it and do seek other people that are going through the same thing. It makes the journey so much easier. And also, don't let others around you put you down, even if they're the closest family member.
Well, thank you guys so much for being here. Like you said, the reason why we are doing these series of YouTube videos and our podcasts, it's really to create an opportunity to share stories, have discussions around topics that people might not feel comfortable sharing. And as a result of the discomfort, it creates isolation. And the isolation leads to those mental health issues that become overwhelming if it's not being addressed and it's not being talked about. So again, I thank you for your courage and your time and your willingness to come in a public space and talk about all of these things that are surely going to be very helpful. So thank you for that, and thank you for all the wisdom that you have and that you've gained through this journey, and for talking about that. I just want to remind everyone that if you are in need of mental health resources and support, you can also call the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health's Access Helpline at 1-800-854-7771. And of course, links to all of the resources that were talked about, including the Access Helpline number, will be provided on this YouTube video. And I want to invite you to listen to our podcasts and also our other YouTube videos as we speak to other members of disabled communities and gain insight and ask them to share their stories. I thank you both, and I thank our viewers.